you, ladies. The cliche tells us, and it's so simple, but it's true, that we don't know what we don't know. And let me just give you an example of that. When you're in kindergarten, you don't know how good you've got it. And I don't know how much you've thought about this lately, but kindergarten really is probably the best year of life. It's just wonderful, isn't it? I mean, you're big enough to do some stuff, but just everything is kind of taken care of for you. But the whole experience at school in kindergarten, that's a great year. And you think about the fun that you had in kindergarten. And you look forward to going to school because school is fun. And there's so much that goes on. You've got, and I don't know how much of it has changed, but I remember in my kindergarten classroom there were different stations that you would work throughout the day. There would be reading time, but in kindergarten you don't have to read. The teacher reads the book for you. That's excellent. You go outside and you play, so you've got recess. We even had, you had your own towel that you would roll out on the floor, and it was nap time. And I mean, think of how much, like you didn't realize, you hated nap time then, but you didn't realize how good you had it. Wouldn't you love? This is not nap time, by the way. Some of you are mistaken. This is not nap time. And so kindergarten was pretty awesome. One of the things, though, that is true, when you've got kids coming into kindergarten, some have been through preschool and they have watched a lot of Sesame Street and they know a lot. Others haven't had that same level of investment, and so one of the jobs of a kindergarten teacher is to try to get everybody on the same page. And there's some basic stuff that you want every child that by the time they have finished kindergarten, some basic concepts that they get. And I remember one of those basic concepts learning, not intentionally. I discovered later that I had learned this. And it was within the first couple of weeks of school, my kindergarten teacher took our class outside, and just outside our classroom, you could see there were two big windows that opened up to this grassy area, and there was this gigantic water oak tree that was out there, a pin oak that was out there. And we had to take paper and crayons, and our task was to draw that tree. And so we drew the tree, and the teacher put our names on all of those papers, but we didn't get to keep them. She took up those papers. A few months later, it was probably in mid to late October, maybe the first part of November, we go back outside again. It's a lot cooler at this point, and we're doing the same thing. We're drawing a picture of that tree, but it looks a little different. Fast forward a few months, we get after Christmas, it's January, February. It's too cold to go outside, and so at this point, we just stay in our classroom and we look out the window. She gives us another piece of paper and we draw that tree. A few months later, it's April and it's nice again. We can go back outside, and again, we go back outside with our pieces of paper and we draw that tree again. And after having done it this time, the teacher gives us not just one of our pictures, but all four of our pictures. And it illustrated in the minds of little kindergartners, this is what happens as seasons change. And so you see what it looks like in full bloom in summer, what it looks like as the leaves change and drop off in the fall, what it looks like barren and brown in the winter, and what it looks like as new life begins in the spring. And so as a kindergartner, that's when I first learned about seasons. That's an important lesson to learn, though, because the reality is, in so many aspects of life, we are operating in seasons, aren't we? In fact, even in our own individual lives, we are operating in seasons. We're going to be thinking about that in a new series that we're beginning today, and thinking about this simple reality, that the gospel intersects us at every age and stage of life. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be, all of these messages are coming to us from the book of Luke, and looking at individuals and the reality of the gospel as it impacts us or intersects our life at childhood, at early adulthood, adolescence, at adulthood, even at senior adult years in life. What does the gospel, what does it say to us as we are experiencing this season of life? This morning, obviously, it makes sense to begin with childhood, and this is the question we want to think about specifically today. What do children who are children of followers of Jesus, what do those children need? In that season of life, children of followers of Jesus, what do those children need? Look with me in your Bibles today, Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, we're going to start reading with verse 22. Luke 2, starting with verse 22, we're told that when the days of their purification according to the law of Moses were finished, they, that's Mary and Joseph, brought him, that's Jesus, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, just as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male will be dedicated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. So you say, well, that's a great verse. I think I'm going to sign all my greeting cards this year with Luke 2:24. What does that have to do with anything? Well, I believe in part this begins the process of helping to answer and lead us to think through the question that what do children of followers of Jesus, what do they need? And I believe even based on what we see in these verses, we see this principle, that children need parents thinking spiritually from the beginning. Children need parents thinking spiritually from the beginning. When you hear Luke 2, it's likely that many of you are probably thinking, well, that's Christmas, because the first part of Luke chapter 2 contains the most detailed Christmas account as Jesus is coming into the world. And once you get through verse 20, the shepherds have come. They have shared what they have seen and heard from the angels. They've come to see Jesus, and then they leave. All right, so at that point, you start at verse 21. Jesus, we're told, is 8 days old, and at 8 days, the days were completed for his circumcision. He was named Jesus. This is what's going on according to some standards that God had given all the way back in the left-hand side of your Bible in the days of Moses as he gave the law. And there were a number of requirements that would need to be observed by those that were the faithful of God. And the first was that if a child was born, in this case a male child was born, on the 8th day after birth, that's when that child would receive the physical mark of the covenant, which was circumcision. That would occur on the 8th day after birth. But male or female, that was also the day that the child would formally get named. And so it doesn't mean that you can't call them a name before then, but that's when they kind of formally get their name. Now, according to the law of Moses, though, the mother of a child was going to be ceremonially unclean from the day of birth. And so once you get to the 8th day, when the child, in this case a male child, gets circumcised, or the female child, either one, they get named, after that, the mother is going to be unclean if it's a male child for 33 more days. If it's a female child, for 66 more days. And after that time is completed, that's when they would need to go and offer a sacrifice. And they would need to be, and the mother would need to be offering a sacrifice for her own purification, because at that point it's day 41. She has completed this season of uncleanness. A sacrifice is to be offered. But if this is the first male child, an offering was to be given, effectively saying, this child has been given to us by you, Lord, and we are dedicated, consecrating him to you. You've given him to us. We're giving this offering back to you. If you were of means, then you would offer a lamb, if that was possible. But if you weren't, you could offer doves or young pigeons as well. And the fact that Mary is taking 2 turtle doves suggests she and Joseph were a couple of very modest means. So you hear that and you say, well, thank you, Michael, for the history lesson. Thank you for refreshing me with some details of Jewish tradition going back to the days of Moses. But what does that have to do with anything? All right, understand this. Jesus now this is his 41st day after birth. And what's going on? He is being taken to the temple where he is going to be dedicated to the Lord. He's already been circumcised. He's been named. And now there is this offering that is going to be given. And this is all occurring in the temple. Why in the world, and think about this question, why in the world would God have gone to such elaborate detail and such elaborate exacting mandates that he would expect his people to follow, to go through all of this ceremony, to go through all of this ritual? You know, after all, especially in this case, this is the first child. And appealing to what I said at the outset, you don't know what you don't know. And when you first have a child, man, that rocks your world, doesn't it? I mean, for one thing, you're not getting sleep, because you've got a baby that it sleeps when they want to, they stay awake when they want to. Every need that they have, you have to supply for them. They can't move, they can't even hold their head up without you, and it's so demanding. They didn't come with an instruction manual. You're trying to figure out what to do. You're trying to figure out how to properly change them, how to keep them, everything. It is so demanding. just the experience of dealing with a firstborn child, oh, by the way, you got to do all this stuff too. Why in the world would God heap coals on our head by adding all of this additional instruction, all of these additional expectations? I believe, from my perspective, the answer is this, that it revolves around an intention of God, which is this: to get families thinking about and involving God in the lives of their children from the earliest of ages. That from the very beginning, involving God in the life of and thinking spiritual thoughts from the earliest of ages. Now, I think this has application on a number of levels. For one thing, and I realize statistics do not prove everything, and they don't tell every story, but they do tell a story. And we're still waiting for Barna to release some new data, because these statistics are getting a little long in the tooth. But in truth, I think what the statistics are going to show is that it's going to get even worse. According to Barna research, more than 60% of every child that ever becomes an adult and says that they are a follower of Jesus. So in the United States, 66% of every person identifies as a born-again believer. Now, whether that's actually the case or not, I mean, that's between them and the Lord. But somebody that identifies as a born-again believer, 66% of them became a follower of Jesus when? Before the age of 18. More than 90% of anybody in the United States, and again, these numbers are getting old now. They're from the mid-early 2000s. More than 90% that say, I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a born-again believer, more than 90% become a follower of Jesus before the age of 30. The likelihood of somebody following and beginning a relationship with Jesus after 30 is less than 10%. That simple statistic ought to inform our thought to remind us of this reality. It is important at the earliest ages and stages in a person's life, in that season of life, to have God incorporated into their experience, to get on their mind, to get on their radar, even when they can't understand everything, that they are getting God involved in the earliest ages and stages and experiences of life. And so, why is this important? Why is this important? Because we, by nature, as people, are procrastinators, aren't we? I will do that. In fact, I will do that good thing later. We'll do that later. We will, as a family, we're going to start going to church later. We're going to get active later. We're going to start reading the Bible as a family together. That's a good thing. We ought to do that. We'll do that later. We'll do that later. And every time we take the can and we just kick it further and further and further down the road. And what seems to happen? Later comes, but what we said we were going to do doesn't. I'll do that tomorrow. Tomorrow. But it seems like tomorrow never comes. And I believe it was important that God gave these standards to His people, because I believe, in truth, it was His intention at this stage of life, even in childhood, that child gets and has parents that are seeking to invest in them spiritually from the beginning. Why is this important? When we bought our current house, one of the nice things about it, it's got a long concrete driveway, but there's this, outside the garage, there's this big concrete area where, multiple cars can park, and half the time it looks like we've got a car lot going on out there. But anyway, that's really nice. The problem is all that concrete went in like 1961. And so when we moved there were some sections of it that were in pretty bad shape and just really broken up, and some sections around some seams that almost looked like it was a gravel lot. Anyway, you're aware that concrete is not inexpensive, and I thought, well, there's no way we could pay to have all this torn out and a whole new driveway and all this area paved. It would cost us a fortune. And so I started looking online to see if there was some things that I could do. And I found this product. It's called Concrete All. You can buy it at Home Depot. It comes in a bag. If you're familiar with Sackcrete, it looks kind of like Sackcrete, except it's where Sackcrete's like $2 a bag. This stuff's like $21 a bag. And it's made for dealing with with broken concrete, and if you've got to fill in something, and I'm telling you, it's an amazing product. There's my endorsement for the day. Go to Home Depot today and buy some concrete all. Anyway, I get this stuff home, and again, it's kind of like Sackcrete. You've got this 40, 50-pound bag, and so I'm going to dump it in a wheelbarrow. And so I do that. I get the hose. I need to mix it with water, and I've got a hose, and I'm going to mix this. And so once I've got it to the proper consistency, and I've already cleaned out all this broken up stuff, I've got it ready to pour this stuff in there. And so I dump it in there, and I've got a trowel and stuff, and I start working this, and I'm doing my magic. And all of a sudden, I realize, Michael better hurry. This is not government work, Michael. You need to. You need to go even faster. And this stuff, as opposed to regular concrete, it starts to form and fashion and harden very, very quickly. And so you've got to do what you're going to do very quickly, because the time, it passes quickly. As the time is passing, it is forming, and once it's formed, there is so little that I can do with it. You understand that children are exactly like that, aren't they? And that the more that time passes, your opportunity to influence is like a window, and it gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And if you are saying, we will do that tomorrow, we'll get to that later, the first reality is this. Most of the time, you won't. You don't. We by nature are procrastinators, and we say, I'll do that. We're going to do that down the road, but tomorrow never seems to come. And what happens if we finally decide, I'm going to get in the game, many times we have waited so that the window of influence is so small that forms and patterns and systems are already established. It is so difficult to mold them and to shape them, to allow them to be fashioned in the ways that God would have originally intended for us to operate. My encouragement for you is to remember this, that children who are the followers of Jesus, they need parents thinking spiritually from the beginning, from the outset. Don't say, I'm going to wait until they're this old. You start from the outset. But maybe, and there's a stack of you here today that will say, well, Michael, thank you for that. It's a day late and $1 short. My kids are grown. My kids have kids, and their kids have kids. So what do I do now? I think a couple of things. First of all, if you are feeling regret, if you are feeling conviction over what I just described and saying, I wish I had, wish I coulda, oughta, I don't believe that's me talking. I believe that's God saying, hey, this should have happened. It didn't. So what do? Just bury your head in the sand and say, well, gloom, despair, and agony on me. This is terrible. I feel bad and hope that I'll feel better later. Listen, I really believe that your children, I believe that your grandchildren would benefit from an honest conversation that goes something like this. I just want to be honest with you and say, I don't think at all that I was a perfect dad or a perfect mom. There's none of those. There's some things that I got right. There's some stuff that I didn't get right. And in truth, one of the things that God has put on my heart as a real burden is I really, really wish that I had involved actively talk about Him, about His Word in our home early on. And the truth is, I just didn't. And I want to own that. I want to tell you, I feel burdened about that. I feel regret about that. And I'm saying this to you not because I'm asking for your forgiveness, but because I want you to learn from my mistakes. I don't want you to feel this way later. And use the influence that you have in the life of your adult children, of your grandchildren, to get them to experience this, that children need parents thinking spiritually, not later, but from the very beginning. There's something else that children need based on what we see in Luke chapter 2 in this season of life, and it's this. Children need parents who are preparing them for service. Children need parents who are preparing them for service. In my case, I have to turn the page, but if you start with me in verse 41, we're told every year his parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom of the festival. After those days were over, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming he was in the traveling party, they went a day's journey. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they didn't find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all those who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" Jesus asked them. "Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he said to them. All right, so Luke 2 begins with the birth of Jesus. And then the next time we pick up Jesus' life here, we're at day 41. And now, by this point, we are 12 years later. We don't know anything about those intervening 12 years. And Jesus grew up in the town of Nazareth, and of course there were a few big days in the Jewish calendar, and one of them was the Passover. And anyone who was of means physically to get to Jerusalem, you were going to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. And so it wouldn't just be you, but everybody from where you're living. You're going to be traveling. And so you think about it, you've got this town, Nazareth. It's a Jewish town. Most everyone, except those most infirmed, are going to be traveling to Jerusalem. And it's likely that they would travel many times in groups, caravans of people. Maybe not the whole town, but I don't know, you've got 50 here, you've got 100 there, 200 there. And you can imagine, it takes a little imagination to conceive of what this would have looked like. Let's say you've got a couple hundred people from Nazareth. Hey, we're going to leave town on Monday afternoon about 2 o'clock. So anybody that's wanting to go, we'll all go together. So you have all of these families that are represented, all leaving at the same time. Now, do your kids want to stay with you when they're kids? No, especially when there's other kids around, they want to be with other kids. And so you can imagine that kids would kind of break up with their peer groups, and that maybe some of the guys would hang out with guys, some of the ladies would hang out with ladies, and just you'd use this travel time to just enjoy some time with friends. Got enough time with family, here's some time to catch up with some others, to have some easy, thoughtless conversation as you were traveling. So they get to Jerusalem. They're in town for a period of days to celebrate the Passover festival, and now it's time to go back. And people would have gone back, in many cases, the same way that they showed up. They're going to be traveling in groups. And so Mary and Joseph, on this particular day, they head out. And they're operating on the assumption that Jesus is with them. Unfortunately for them, he is not. And they do not realize until they have traveled a full day outside the city of Jerusalem. They've been walking all day long, haven't seen Jesus the entire day, and now it's time to have supper and time for everyone to kind of get back together with their family group. Hey, where's Jesus? I don't know. And they start looking around with everyone that's traveled with them, but no one can seem to find Jesus. And we don't know how much time passes, but finally they figure out he's not with us. So now he must be in Jerusalem. They've traveled an entire day to where they are. They've got to travel an entire day to get back to Jerusalem to find Jesus, who is where? Somewhere in the city. And so as they get to the city, so they missed him one day, travel back another day, and then they start looking. And so on this third day, finally, they find Jesus. And where is he? He's at the temple. And he is engaging the religious leaders, both asking questions and then sharing information as well. And when they see Jesus, Mary and Joseph just say, Joseph, just look at him, our little angel. Mary, look at him. He is so well spoken, so bright. Watch him as he engages these who are much older. Are they pleased at all, just taking in and reveling in the moment? No, they are furious. Mary is ticked, and it's like you can imagine she goes and grabs Jesus almost by the ear and says, "Why have you done this thing to us?" I mean, we have been worried sick. We haven't eaten in the past couple of days because we didn't know if we would ever see you again. You have brought and heaped harm on us. We are so frustrated, so disappointed, so aggravated, so incensed. And hearing this, Jesus says, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" Some translations render it this way. weren't you aware that I had to be about my Father's business? It seems that Mary and Joseph were operating under a premise. Now, let me say this. You get Mary's frustration. I mean, if you've ever been separated from any of your children for any period of time, the fear, all the thoughts that are going through your mind, the anxiety, the apprehension, we get that. We can sympathize with this. But it seems as Mary and Joseph find Jesus, they have effectively no feeling about what they find him doing. They're watching this, they see this, they take this in, but they completely gloss over it, that Jesus is discussing biblical truth, that he is thinking meaningfully about spiritual things, and he is engaging others in that. And in this, I believe there's a lesson that I'd say it again this way, that children need parents who are preparing them for service. And I believe one of the things that is a takeaway from this is a very simple thought, which is this: if someone is able to be a follower of God, they're also able to be a servant of God. Now, many times what we do is that we fall into a trap. And that is that we will seek to point our kids towards Jesus or get them in church with the hope that spiritual things get into their mind and their heart and point them towards having a relationship with Jesus. But in terms of service, that'll happen later. You can do some stuff later. You can do stuff when you're bigger. You can't do that. You can't do anything now. And hear me in this. I'm not suggesting at all that children need to be able to do everything that adults are capable of doing. What I am suggesting is this, that many times we fall into a trap where we think that children can serve God just later. But if they're capable enough of beginning a relationship with God, even at those ages, there are appropriate ways in which they can begin and should be beginning to serve the Lord. And why is that important? Why is this of consequence? Well, I think if you wait until someone crosses a magic age or stage, you say, well, when you're 18 or when you're 21, then you'll be given an opportunity then to serve the Lord. Let me ask you this. If you haven't been doing it for 18 or 20 years, why in the world do you think you're going to start now? I mean, if we just say, well, we're going to do everything for you, we're going to hand this to you for 20 years, why in the world do you think a 20-year-old is going to start to say, okay, well, I'll do that for myself? They won't do it. Beyond that, if you haven't been doing something for 20 years, one of the things that you have missed out on is an opportunity to get better with it over time. That you don't have skills, that you don't have tools in your tool belt because you've never had an opportunity to ride with training wheels and to, in safe environments, begin to learn things and begin to get exposed to them. And I'm telling you, children then needed, as children today that are the children of the followers of God, they need parents, they need adults around them that are preparing them for service. And the greatest way you can prepare kids for service is give them opportunity to serve. I have for almost 2.5 years now been taking banjo lessons, and I love it. I really do. I've had a lot of fun. And over the past 2.5 years, I've had 4 teachers who have taught me. And the one that I've got now is my absolute favorite. He's really good. I wish I were as good a student as he is a teacher and a player. But over that time, like I said, we've had 4 different teachers. And in truth, I don't mean to bemoan any of them because we learned stuff by all of them. But there was one teacher that we had that might have been probably my least favorite. And he wasn't a bad guy. He was nice. He really was. And he was kind to me, kind to our kids. And in terms of musical knowledge, I mean, he was really on his game. He had an undergraduate degree in music, played a whole slew of instruments, not just kind of okay, but was an excellent instrumentalist. Had a great ear, and that was really nice. And we learned some stuff from him. But this is one of the things that frustrated me about him. And this didn't just happen once. It happened multiplied times. I would sit down for a lesson. And keep in mind, I'm paying for this lesson. This is not charity work that they are signing up for. And so I'm sitting there. He's in front of me. I'm sitting in front of him. We both have instruments. And I would have a 30-minute lesson. And on multiplied times, I never played a single note. Not one ding. Nothing. Now, he would have played, he would have talked, I would have asked a question perhaps, and he would share all kinds of stuff. Most of the time, it just went completely over my head. But I would sit there for an entire 30 minutes. He would leave. I would pay him. And I would tell Caroline, I didn't play a single note. Now, he was sharing good information. He was sharing with me information and details and facts that he believed to be important and essential for my understanding. I was getting good data. I was getting good information. But my goal is not to be a good banjo data person. I want to be a good player. And I'll never be able to be a good player if I don't ever get to go dink. Too many times as adults, too many times as parents, what we content ourselves to do is to keep pouring information and data into kids. And don't misunderstand me, they need that. They need it. They need it. They need to hear it over and over and over and over again. They need that investment. But they're never, as followers of Christ, and understand me in this, you cannot be a legitimate follower of Jesus. If you're a legitimate follower of His, you're also going to be a servant of His. They're not separated. If you're following Jesus, you're going to be serving Him. But understand, you will never, ever, ever be prepared to do that if all you get is data, if all you get is information. You need opportunity and occasion for service. We need to start thinking about this differently than perhaps that we have. And we need to start, again, I'm not suggesting that we need to give children every single opportunity that's afforded every single adult, but I am suggesting that we need to give them opportunities to get on the field, to get out of the classroom sometimes. Instead of just learning stuff, actually developing skills and using giftedness that God has already given them. Sometimes it can be simple things, like what we did yesterday, is we had children from I guess probably 3 to 4 was the youngest that we had, to almost 90 that were here across the age spectrum as we packed 15,600 meals yesterday. Even at the earliest ages and stages, we're seeking to provide opportunities for kids to realize you can be and should be used by God, not just receiving, but giving back and being useful in His hands. So what do you do in response to this? What might this challenge you to do? Well, if you're a parent with children in the home, or you are a grandparent and you've got the ability to seek to influence, and I realize on a diminished scale, your adult children and then your grandchildren, think about this. What are some ways, and intentionally think about this, what are some ways that I can give my children, I can give my grandchildren opportunities to come alongside me and to do service for the Lord, allow God to work through us together? Instead of saying, you go over there and play while we do this work, why don't you come join me? Why don't you participate in this? Maybe you would say, well, Michael, I don't have any children, or I am past this stage, or my family is so far away. I don't have any children in immediate proximity to me. There are children. If you're connected with this church, there are children in this church that need people like you, regardless of your age and stage, where you start thinking about them in ways in which, as you're serving the Lord, you might be able to intentionally invite a little boy, invite a little girl to come alongside you and serve. And it doesn't have to be something spectacular. It can be something small, but children need this. The followers of God that have children or are exposed to children, they need those that are preparing them for service. And the greatest way to prepare them to serve is to give them opportunities to serve. Our lives revolve around seasons. They do. Every one of us is in a season of life. And there are those that are among us, those that we are exposed to, that are in this earliest season of life. Yeah, there's a lot that they can't do, but there's a lot that they can. There's a lot of needs that they have, not just for clothes, not just for food, not just for instruction in an academic setting. They need those around them that are thinking spiritually from the earliest of stages. They need people around them in the home and even in the church that are preparing them for service. I think even in the example of Jesus, we see that children need this. Will you bow your heads with me?